Hello and welcome to this edition of Assembly Calendar. I'm Visscher. Our guest today is New York State Assemblywoman Claudia Tenney. Claudia represents the 101st Assembly District, which encompasses Oneida, Herkimer, Otsego, Delaware, Sullivan, Ulster, and Orange counties. Thank you very much for joining us today. Always a pleasure to have you join us for the next 15 minutes to talk about the latest happenings of what's been going on in the Assemblywoman's District. Always a pleasure to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Hopefully
Great
I got all
job
the
on my
counties in there.
Great job. You got them all.
The summer's been good?
Yeah,
overall?
It's a long summer, it seems like, without having to campaign.
Right.
So it's been a great summer, very interesting summer. As we mentioned before we came on the show, I took a little vacation. Haven't done it in a while. I went to, actually since I've been elected to office, I haven't been back, but I have a long history of starting out my career, or my college career. In 1981, I took a study group to Italy. And then later in the year, I did another study group to what was then Yugoslavia, and now ended up working in the Yugoslav consulate. But so I went back, I returned to Italy this year, and I returned to Croatia again, which I've done many times, my 10th trip or so. But it was very interesting, and I got to visit the Italian Parliament in Rome, which was really an interesting experience, and just watching how they operate and being led around and met what they call the deputies, which is the equivalent of Congress members. And meeting them in their and talking to them about their district. I met someone that's head of the agricultural committee, because that's a big thing in Italy now with their wines, and they're trying to promote wineries. And I went to a winery that is owned in this place called Montepulciano, which is this little town in Tuscany just below Siena. And I met this wonderful guy named Lorenzo Pagliano, and they own, or Paganelli, I got his name wrong. They have a winery that it's been hidden in his family since the 1300s. Can you imagine? So it was really interesting just to go and see what they're doing and how they're promoting their wines at the national level, and how they want to promote their wines in the United States and across the world. So I learned a lot about how they all strive to get to the United States to sell their wares. So it was very interesting. But you know, just listening to their discussion about how the Italian Parliament works, and how, you know, we talk about how things work in Albany, and you know, the business of doing government is not so pretty sometimes. And they were interested in telling me about, it's not mafia, it's organized crime, you know. So it was very fun, and I got to go into the Parliament and watch them all in action. Of course, we have two parties, maybe an independent here and there, not in New York, of course, but in their Parliament, which would be their Congress, there are like 10 or 15 parties. So it's very confusing, all the lights going on and all the parties, you know, lighting up on different issues.
Were you there for the debate, some of the debate
they were
that was
debating,
going on?
They were debating, and I got to look over. It's a very beautiful old building, and I looked over, and of course, they're all on their iPhones and their iPads at their desks. And I said, wow. Where do we see that happening?
Yes, that's right.
But unlike the U.S. Congress, they're actually live voting. It's more like the state assembly, because the U.S. Congress doesn't really typically live vote except on a rare occasion. So it was very interesting just to see them, and you know, how they're struggling with their economy and how much they are trying to do many of the same things we're doing. And although Italy is very concerned that they don't want to be the next Greece. So it was just a great experience. And of course, we got to drink some wonderful wine and
talk about Donald Trump.
Talk about Donald Trump, which they were so fascinated with, which everyone was, whether I was in Italy or Croatia. We even drove through Bosnia. Everybody was interested in Donald Trump, and you know, what I thought of him, what they thought if he would be president. And
so clearly, I mean, he's drawing a lot of attention, international attention,
worldwide attention.
Right?
He is definitely a celebrity. We had 24 million people watch the Republican debate.
That was a record.
Versus 2 million the last time on the first debate. I didn't get to see it because I was in Croatia at the time. I was still traveling, but they were still. I mean, they were fixated on watching it there too. So it was very interesting. You know, just from a political standpoint, I've never really been able to visit a place like the Italian Parliament or something of that interest. So it was great. It was very interesting, and just to listen to them describe what they're trying to achieve, and the frustrations they have with their government. It sounded just very similar to the Republicans in the Assembly and what we're trying to fight in Albany, as far as promoting commerce, dealing with regulations and high taxes and government corruption, and what they're trying to do just to emerge as a more prosperous nation, and us as a more prosperous state, as we flounder in like one of the worst states to do business in the United States. So that part of it was very interesting for me. But yeah, you know, go ahead, ask me about Donald Trump. I know it's burning in your mind.
Donald Trump, I mean, it's just interesting, your overall thoughts on where he's come to this point in terms of it's still early on, obviously.
I think, a lot of people call it anger. I don't think it's anger. I think he's what they describe as a happy warrior. I think he is having the time of his life. Who is having more fun than Donald Trump right now? He's out there. He's saying what he thinks needs to be said. He's not worried about litmus tests and polls. He's listening to the American public. He may have been, flip-flopping completely on every position, but what he's doing is going out there and presenting himself and taking the questions, whether some people may think he's not. He's going to these press conferences and just saying, have at me, ask me questions. He's firing back, and just about everything he says, the media is hanging on his every word. He's calling out the establishment on both sides of the parties, both sides. And I think it's fascinating. Now, will he, as a president, stand up to all the things he claims he's going to stand up to? Because we've seen his positions have changed dramatically. He's not a conservative. The big question I think we have to ask about Donald Trump, is he a leader? Is he a leader that will rise to the occasion and stand up for the American way, our Constitution, and all those things that we're looking for? Because we've seen a lawlessness like we've never seen before.
I mean, immigration really is a big issue.
Notice how nobody's talked about immigration very much. I talked about it last year a little bit. But he has presented immigration, and he's skyrocketed to the top of the polls. And I think it's very interesting because the immigration issue is a touchy issue. People say, well, we have a lot of sympathy. We're all immigrants. We're a nation of immigrants. But I think what some people may want to reflect on is we love to have immigrants move into our region. In fact, one of the funny things about my life experience going to Yugoslavia and then the tragedy of the war in Yugoslavia and what happened to our Bosnian refugees, well, I live in the Utica area where 7,000 Bosnian refugees have resided, the largest Bosnian refugee population in the country, because of this interesting scenario there. However, they're all refugees, refugee status. When my grandparents were coming to this country in the early days, we were very open. We had fairly open immigration policy because we didn't have an entitlement system. Now, Jeb Bush may say people are coming here for love, but I think they're coming here for our entitlements and for freedom and for our rights and what we stand for as Americans, which is great too. But we also have to remember we have our own citizens who need jobs and need to be respected, and our laws need to be respected. So I think it's a really interesting, he's come right out and he's not afraid to say, hey, we need to do something about this.
I don't think the issue so much is legal immigration, but more so illegal.
It's illegal the illegal immigration. The legal immigrants, we want legal immigrants to come here and enrich our nation as we have. As I said, Utica is celebrated as one of the areas where we have refugees from all over. The Utica City School District, something like 37 languages are spoken there because we're an immigrant community, which is wonderful. But we also are suffering. Our state aid is low. We aren't getting the federal help we need to provide for many of these immigrants and people that are coming in under refugee status for English as a second language and many of the cultural barriers that we face. So you have to remember, there is a huge cost to bringing people in and not having the resources to do it. And you have to remember your legal citizens come first, and we have to respect them. So yeah, legal immigration is great. It's great for this country, but illegal immigration, to me, and also as someone who worked in the former Yugoslav consulate, as an American employee, or the only American, I should say, I have many friends from the former Yugoslavia who are waiting in other countries or Canada, and they want to get their American citizenship. They've been waiting 10, 12, 20 years, and they don't have it yet.
And want to go through the
They're
legal
doing
process.
it through the legal process. Now, you're going to tell me that somebody comes across the border illegally and you're going to have more sympathy for them than someone that's trying to come in our country legally. So it's a tough question, but Donald Trump just goes right out.
It's going to be interesting because he is the front runner right now, but we still have quite a ways to go.
Yes, and a year before the election of, I think it was 2008, I believe, Rudy Giuliani was the front runner, and he found out he never even got past. He never got past South Carolina in the primary. So we have Super Tuesdays coming up in early February. So that'll be. We'll see. We'll see. It's going to be an exciting campaign year, whether you like Donald Trump or not. He has brought a lot of attention to the presidential race. He's forced us to look at what we stand for as Americans, what our Constitution stands for, where are we going in the future? Are we going to preserve our republic that we have, our constitutional republic? Are we going to continue down the road of massive debt and it's really
perhaps socialism.
Perhaps socialism. I feel like it's almost really. If you want to come to New York, I feel like it's practically here, especially when you look at Andrew Cuomo's world and some of the policies he's put in place for small business owners, where we remain pretty much dead last as far as even in spite of all the initiatives, we're still very, very far behind as small business, as a place to do business, and especially for our small business owners and farmers who produce most of the new jobs. 65% of the new jobs are produced by small businesses, not these big fat cats that come in.
And that brings me to my next point, and that is Startup New York.
Oh, Startup New York. Yeah, another failed policy of the governor where we spent, what, $250 million, mostly as a veiled ad campaign for the governor in an election year, interestingly enough. And what have we produced? Very few jobs. Now, the governor recently...
I think it was 76.
It was 76 at the last
or,
count.
okay.
And I did a piece, we talked about this before, and cronyism and taking taxpayer money and giving it to big businesses is not the answer. I just said the facts. The facts are 65% nationwide of the new jobs created are small businesses, not these big companies that we take tons of taxpayer money and give to, which is called cronyism or corporatism or crony capitalism, whatever you want to call it. That is not worked. It's never worked. But what happens is when you do that, you have the government in what the governor calls a public-private partnership. Well, the last thing you want the government partnering with is private business. And then the private business is now beholden to whom? The politicians that are handing them the money, which is our money,
right.
The people who've paid the taxes.
So, I mean, tax breaks for 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years.
Large corporations.
And by the way, here's another interesting aspect of that, which a lot of people have come to me, a lot of small business owners in our community, which my district is mostly small business owners, have said, hey, I have a small business. How can I compete, for example, with Startup New York when their employees aren't going to be paying income tax for 10 years? If I were an employee, I'd go over to wherever these jobs are, go tax-free for 10 years, and then, again, small businesses aren't just competing against other businesses, we're competing for human capital. We need people to run our businesses. We need people. They're the most important asset of any business, and I'm a small business owner. I know that. I mean, we have been around since 1946, and our employees are the most important capital that we have. We care about them. We provide health care. We do all these things to be competitive, and now government's getting in the way, telling us what our wages are going to be.
I was going to say, not to mention minimum wage.
Minimum wage increase, which really didn't affect us so much, but it affects our industry, and it affects the ability of us to be competitive. So then, when you go down the street and you've got a Startup New York business that doesn't have to pay income tax, their employees don't. I mean, that's unfair to me. I think it's actually a constitutional issue. How can you allow one person to not pay income tax and another has to? Thanks to the government intervention. It's, again, government picking winners and losers instead of the market. And then what happens when all that money runs out? Where's all the government? When the government money runs out, where's this business going to be? You've gutted the rest of the legitimate businesses, and maybe many of them have either closed or left. And then what do you have? You have a business that constantly has to be fed by taxpayer money. That's not a legitimate business. And legitimate business people don't want to get into that situation where they're beholden to government. So that's Andrew Cuomo's model for bringing business. And guess what it's done in 5 years? We're still bad. We're still dead last. $1 billion to Buffalo. What does Buffalo have? Same economy, highest sales tax in the state, tied with Oneida County, where I live, and New York City. Failing school district, which we keep pumping money into. So what is it doing? I mean, really.
Some would argue that he essentially used Startup New York as a campaign platform.
Yeah, and I've said that. I wrote a column on that. I mean, it's interesting that it was talking about how great it is. It did everything but show a picture of him and say his name. And, of course, that's prohibited by a law that was passed in 2007 where politicians can't use taxpayer money to promote themselves, the old I Love New York campaign, where they had the former governor, one of the former governors in there. So it's an interesting, as someone who is, economically a conservative and a small business owner, I want to grow my business. I want to stay in New York. It's a beautiful place. It's a wonderful state, but you can't keep suffocating the people that are already here.
Assemblywoman, always a pleasure to see you. We are done. 15 quick 15 minutes.
Great to see you.
Thank you very much for joining us today. If you'd like to reach out to Assemblywoman Claudia Tenney, you can do so by contacting her district office or reach out to her on Facebook. There is her information on the screen there. Reach out to her at any time. Thank you very much for joining us today. Until next time, always a pleasure. Take care.